We're on Daf Hayamid Bays, and we're up to Tanur Rabbanan, which is 5 lines down from the top. Tanur Rabbanan, Gemara now is analyzing Bal Yerub Yimatze, these two lavim, and the scope of each lav, and why we need both. Shivas Yomim Si'ar Lo Yimatze Bivatechem. We have to emphasize two things. Number one, it doesn't say Lecha. Si'ar is not necessarily yours, but it says Batechem. It's in your house, not outside in your broader boundaries. We already have a lav of lo yirah lecha, and there the Torah says b'chol gvulecha, which takes you outside the bounds of your bias, and therefore it would seem that lo yirah is like 200 and lo yimatze is like 100. And yesh b'chlal masayim mana. So once we have the lav of lo yirah, why do we need the lav of lo yimatze? Lefisha never lo yirah lechasiar. And the Torah in the pasuk of lo yirah added the word lecha. So the precondition for violating this lav is that shalcha, it's yours. Shalcha ya Torah, val Torah shal acherim v'shal gavah. But if the chametz belongs to a guy, and it happens to be in your rishus, so you could see the chametz, but it's not lecha or hegdesh. It belongs to hegdesh. Somebody was magdish chametz, and it's outside of your ownership, so it's not lecha. It's therefore, I would have said in such a case, yachol. I would think that, well, actually, forget about yachol. We're not ready for yachol yet. Let's just say that right now the pasuk lo yirah lecha adds a miyut of lecha, and you're only in violation of the lav if it's lecha, as opposed to the case of shel acherim or shel gavo. However, yochel yatmin v'yakabel pigdonis min anochri. Now we're saying that once we have the miyut of lecha, and the Torah says lo yirah, that you're not allowed to see the chametz with your naked eye, then I would draw the conclusion that you would be allowed to have all cases of chametz of a guy in your rishus, because it's not shalcha, even in a case of pikdono shel nachri, which we'll speak about in just a second. And I would think if I only had lo yirah, that in a case where it's yatmin, where he hides the chametz, so it's not nirah la'ayin, that's not included in the Isur. And in the case of pikdono shel nachri, whereas we'll soon see, you have a level of achrayus, the guy deposited his chametz in your rishus. If you just invited him in and said, okay, you want to put your chametz down on my table or in my storage area, fine, but I don't have any responsibility for that. That's one thing. That certainly is excluded under lecha. But can we take the miyut of lecha even to exclude a case where you, as a Jew, are responsible for the chametz of a guy? He asks you to take upon yourself achrayus, be a shomer, and guard it, and be responsible for the chametz. Even in that case, it's not lecha. Talmud lo yimatze. There's where lo yimatze comes to the fore, to teach you that we omit the word lecha. Lecha is not a precondition, and therefore in two cases, you will be chayav. Number one, pikdonos shel nachri. And why? Because since the Torah omitted the word lecha in the pasuk lo yimatze, it came to imply an inclusion of chametz shel nachri when it's pikdonos, and the Yisrael took upon himself responsibility. The lecha that we saw in the pasuk lo yirah is going to exclude a case where you invite the guy's chametz in, but you have no level of responsibility whatsoever. And in the case of al yatmin, which would have been excluded under the pasuk lo yirah because you can't see it, and now you hit it, the pasuk lo yimatze, which omitted the word omitted yirah and says lo yimatze, any chametz that could be found anywhere in your rishus, you violate, and therefore in the cases of lo yatmin and yikabel pikdonos v'nochri, the Torah excluded it. Excluded it meaning excluding it from the exclusion, meaning the Torah included it. And that's derived from lo yimatze. So lo yimatze gives me a much more all-encompassing scope of an Isur lav in having chametz in your possession, somewhere within your in your house, even if it's hidden and you can't see it because lo yimotze doesn't have lo yirah, doesn't have the connotations of that precondition of yirah. And the lo yimotze, by dropping the lecha, indicates a broader scope that's going to include in the lav cases like pikdono shel nochri, which, although it's not technically yours, but because of your level of responsibility, it's included in lo yimotze. Now there's a part of the brisa that's very enigmatic, and the Gemara is going to spend a lot of time trying to decipher it. Ainli ella ben nochri shaloki bashto ve'ein sharui imcha b'chatzer. I might suggest that when the Torah in Lo Yimotze is coming to include a case of Chametz al Nachri, and that's also a violation of this law because the Torah omitted the word L'cha in Lo Yimotze, I would limit that heter to a case of a guy Shaloki Bashto. You don't have any control over this guy. I mean, we're talking about a situation that existed at some points, some very rare but lit up points in Jewish history where the Jews actually had sovereignty and control over the goyim. So you have a guy who you have control over. He has to answer to you, and not only that, he might be living in your backyard, meaning in your chutzner. So I would think that if Loki Bashta, he's a guy who's independent, you have no control of him. He ain't shari imcha b'chatzer, and he lives elsewhere. In that case, maybe you're allowed to have the guy's chametz in your rishus. Minayin had to include even this case in the Yisur Lav, Talmud Lomar lo yimotze b'teichem. And lo yimotze b'teichem, as we said before, gives a broader scope to include even the case of Loki Bashto and Ein Shori Imcha B'chotz. Ainly, the Brisa continues, Elot shebibatechem. The Torah says in the pasuk Lo yimotze bibatechem, that's the precondition, it's in your house. Biboros besichin umaoros. If you own area outside your house, you have a yard outside your house, you have a cistern, you have even a kind of a cave outside your house. You have many areas that are outside your house, and that's where your chametz is found. It's your chametz, it's in your rishus, but it's not in your bayis. Is I would say, Minayin, how do I know that you violate this law for possessing chametz that's not in your house? Talmud Lomar bechol gvulecha. Now we go back to the pasuk Lo Yiroeh, and there it says bechol gvulecha, and it means anywhere in the area, the territory that's yours. But Adayin Aniyam Omer, the Brisa continues, I would still insist, bibatim, where it says Lo yimotze bibatecha, is over mishum bal yira ubal yimotze bal yatmin ubal yikabel pigdonos min anochri. The Torah is very machmir in the case of Lo yimotze bibatechem, and if the chametz is in your bayis, it's literally under your nose, even though you can't see it because you hid it in the basement, and you would violate based on the ribui of Lo Yimotze, where the Torah omits the word L'cha, so that's not a precondition. In the case where you took a chrayis on the chametz of a guy, even though it's not technically yours, you violate the Isur Bal Yimotze. But that only applies Bibatechem. Big Gvulin. When we get to Gvulin, we no longer have an Isur that's derived from Lo Yimotze. We have to interpret the pasuk of Lo Yirah. That could be the only possible violation in the case of Gvulin. If it's outside of your house, it's in Boros Sichim Amorim. And now we're going to exclude the case where the chametz is owned by the guy or by Hegdesh. And we're going to say you don't violate those, any Isurim, in the case where the chametz is in your gvul, which means it's not subject to the violation of Lo Yimotze, where it says Batechem. It could only be possibly included under the scope and the violation of Lo Yirah. But at this point, we're talking about chametz that's outside your bayis and your gvulin, and it doesn't belong to you. is minayin litain es ha'omur shel zeh bozeh v'shel zeh bozeh. How do we know that we can make an equation between these two lavin in such a way that we can prohibit chametz in gvulin, even if it's tamun or it's shel nachri? How do we prohibit that? After all, if it's tamun and it's shel nachri, it doesn't come under the Isur lo yirah. It can only come under lo yimatzeh. But we're talking about chametz b'gvulin. It's not in your bias, and lo yimatzeh is preconditional on bias. So how do we know that we have an open gateway, an open flow from one lav to the other, and all the cases that are included in both lavim are therefore a violation of two lavim? Talmud Lomer Sior Sar L'Gzer Shava, Nemar Sior B'Batim, in a pasuk of Lo Yimotze, where the Torah says Batim, it calls Chametz Sior. Nemar Sior B'Gvulin, in the pasuk of Lo Yirah L'Cha Sior, B'Chol Gvulecha, there it says Sior. And now we're going to make an equation based on this Gzeret Shava. And we're going to say the following. Ma Sior Ha'omer B'Batim. Over mishum bal yiro, bal yimotze, bal yatminu, bal yikabel pigdonos minan nachrim. Just like in the case of the CR of lo yimotze, where the Torah stipulates that it's in your batim, you're going to violate both bal yiro and bal yimotze, and that's going to include even bal yatmin and bal yikabel pigdonos minan nachrim, because in lo yimotze the Torah did not stipulate that it's got to be lecha, to the exclusion of chametz shel nachrim. And in Bal Yimotze, the Torah didn't say Lo Yirah that you have to see it, and therefore the Torah is prohibiting you even in a case of hidden chametz of Bal Yatmin. So all this is now going to be included in Lo Yimotze, and by virtue of the Gzera Shava, you're going to be violating not only Lo Yimotze, because once it's included Lo Yimotze, then ipso facto it's also included the violation of Lo Yirah because of this Gzera Shava. And now we go the other direction. Masiar Hamer b'Gvulin. In the case of Gvulin, that's Lo Yirah. If that's going to be my Malamed, it says Lo Yirah. Shel Chaya Torah, Aval Torah Shel Achem Shel Gavah. Which means that the Torah stipulates that it's got to be Shel Cha. We're going to exclude the case of Chametz Shel Nachri or Chametz Shel Hegdesh. And now when we get to Batim, where the Torah is more machmir, we have the CR to tell me that whatever applies to Bal Yirah, now ipso facto applies to Bal Yimotze by virtue of this Gzeret Shava. Is therefore, even in Batim, where you violate Lo Yimotze, Shel Chayat Torah, Aval Torah, Shel Achem Shel Gavah. I can still have the exclusion of Shel Achem Shel Gavah, which we derive from Lo Yirah, but now from Lo Yirah, we apply it now, those exclusions, to Lo Yimotze by virtue of the CR. So it comes out that you're going to violate both lavim in the cases of Bal Yatmin and in Pikdono Shel Nachri. That's going to be derived from the CR of Lo Yimotze. And not only that, those violations are going to apply not only Bebatim, where it says in Lo Yimotze, but even Bigvulin, and that's going to be derived through CR from Bal Yirah. On the other hand, Bal Yirah is going to teach me something about Bal Yimotze, because Bal Yirah is going to teach me that if it's not Lecha, and if it's not totally yours, technically yours, then you don't violate Bal Yirah, and therefore, ipso facto, you don't violate Bal Yimotze because of the Gzeret Shava. So this is the end of the Brisa. Now the Gemara analyzes the Brisa. Omar Mar, we had that second paragraph in the Brisa that was very perplexing. I would only exclude a case where the Nachri is independent, he's not under your tutelage, under your control, and he's not living in your house. Then the Torah allows you to have his chametz. That's one thing. But Nachri shekibasev shamrim v'chatzev, in a case where the Nachri is in your control, and whatever he owns, you own, and not only that, he's living in your courtyard, is minayin. How do I know that that's also excluded and you're not in violation of these lavim? Talmud Loma Lo Yimatzeh. Doesn't make any sense because Lo Yimatzeh is an expansion. It's a reboot. I mean, all the conditions that we saw in Lo Yiroah, that you have to be able to see it and that you have to own it because it says L'cha in Lo Yiroah, but those conditions were not formulated in Lo Yimatzeh. So what's the Talmud Loma Lo Yimatzeh? You're trying to look for a kula and you derive it from a chumrah? Klape laya. Mitzad Asfara, we should have said just the opposite. If you're telling me that Nachri, she'eno coverage tachas yod, eno gar yached idcha, and yet you're going to tell me that what? That ata over al chemtzom. Are you going to violate the Isur Chametz? Because again, you're quoting Lo Yimatzeh as a chumrah to include it under the violation. Is kolshkin how much more so if he's covered tachas yodcha, and not only that, he's garitcha biyachad, that you're going to violate the Isur Chametz. So why did the Brisa say that I might think that the heter here applies in Loki Bashto and Eno Shari B'Chavachatz, and I want to establish and expand the heter, expand it to include even a case of Kibashto and Shari B'Chavachatz, that we're going to derive from Lo Yimatzeh. Lo Yimatzeh is coming to expand the Isur, not to contract the Isur. Of Rabbi Epuch, Abai says that this Brisa is Mishubeshta. This is not a reliable Brisa. You have to turn it inside out. And the gears of the Brisa should say the following: I would only know that I violate the surim of possessing chametz if the guy is under my tutelage, under my control. I have sovereign powers to subjugate him, and he's living in my chutzah. How do I know that even if he's a stranger to me, he's an alien? I don't have any control over him. I have no relationship with him. He's not living in my chutzah. How do I know that that's also included in the Isur? Again, in the case of Achrayus, is Talmud Loma Lo Yimatzeh. So Lo Yimatzeh is a chumrah that's going to expand the Isur to include even a case of Nachri Shelo Kibashto V'Shelo Shari Imcha B'Chatzeh, which I would have thought would be mutter. Rava Amar Lo Olam Lo Tepuch. Rava wants to maintain the integrity of the Brisa as we have the Areisha Koi, but rather this piece is going back to the Reisha. What does that mean? It's going back to the Reisha. It means the following: that we're going back to a heter, and we're talking about a case where we derive from the pasuk lecha in lo yiroeh that you're allowed to have chametz of a goy of acherim. Is ainly, I might think that this exclusion and this leniency applies only Ella Nachri ben Nachri Shalo Kibash Vein Shari Mechabachatzer, but Nachri Shekibashto is Shari Mechabachatz Minayin. How do you know that even in this case of a Nachri that's under your control and he's living under your nose, and nevertheless you don't violate the Isur of Bayu Rabbi Yimatzeh when he owns the Chametz? Is the answer is Talmud Loma Lo Yimatzeh. So Gemara right away jumps. The pasuk is being quoted lehetera to tell you that even in a case of an you don't violate the law. How do you derive that from Lo Yimatzeh? So the Gemara answers that this is what the Tana really meant to say. Mishum shenemar lecha lecha trei zimni. In the Isur of Lo Yira, where it says lecha regarding to chatzar in your gvulin, that's one lecha. But there's another lecha. One lecha is in Parshas Bo, Lo Yira lecha chametz, Lo Yira lecha sar b'chol gvulecha. And in Parshas Re'eh in Dvarim Perek Zayin, Lo Yira lecha sar b'chol gvulecha shivas yom. Again, the Torah repeats the word lecha. And lecha twice is a double mute. Each lecha is coming to exclude a certain situation, certain scenario. One lecha is going to exclude a lowercase chidush, which would be a case of nachri shaloki bachto velo shori imcha b'chotzer. And the second miyut, the extra lecha, is coming to exclude the case of Nachri Shekibashto V'Shori Imcha B'Chot. And even in those cases, you don't violate the East. Omar Mar, the Brisa said earlier, Yochel Yakmi Kabel Pikdos V'Nochi Tamalam Lo Yimotze. From Lo Yimotze, we derive number one that you're not allowed to hide your chametz, and number two that you cannot take a chrayus for the guy's chametz. Ha'amrit Reisha Shel Chaya Torah V'La Torah Shel Chem Shel Gavoa. The Brisa seems to contradict itself. On the one hand, Lo Yirah has the extra lecha to exclude Shalacherim. On the other hand, Lo Yimotze is being used as a ribui because lecha was omitted to include Chametz Shel Gai. How do we reconcile this? Lo Kasha, ha the Kibul Echrayis, ha the Lo Kibul Echrayis. It all depends on what you told the guy. If you told the guy, Hanach lefanecha, find a place and put your chametz somewhere in my rishus, that's one thing. But if you told the guy, yes, I commit myself, but watch and guard your chametz, and if the chametz is lost, I will replace it. I will buy you chametz. And in that case, the loss of achrayis is considered shalcha. So when we have the miyut of lecha in the pasuk lo yirah, that's coming to exclude a case where you don't have any achrayis. But when we have the lo yimotze, that the Torah omitted the word lecha, coming to include a case where you have achrayis. And the Gemara now tells a story to support this. Ki ha di amalahu Rava lebnei Machoza, in Rava's local town called Machoza, he warned the Jewish people, Be'iru chamira dibnei chela mibataycha, get rid of the chametz of the chayalim. What happened was that the mochel, the non-Jewish king or leader, would force the Jewish people to feed his soldiers that were out there in the battlefield. And when they would come in from the battle, the Jews would put the food on the table. And if they put loaves of bread on the table, they had achrayus. The Jews had responsibility. The king would demand that if the food and the loaves of bread were not there, the Jews would have to go out to the supermarket, the local bakery, and replace them. Therefore, says Rava, in this case, you better get rid of that chametz. Again, how you're going to work it out with the moshel, I don't know. But teva de ilu mignav, if this chametz would be stolen, the ilu misvad, or it be lost, it's as if it's in your rishus. It's as if you're losing something that's yours, in effect, because you're going to have to replace it. You're going to have to dig into your pocket and pay to make sure that the chayalim get that food. Is kiddush chundami? It's like yours, v'yasa, and you violate by your rabbi yimotzi. So again, in Pikdon Shel Nachri, where you accepted achrayus, I'm not sure what level of achrayus, but some level of achrayus, such that you'll have to pay if it's lost. That chametz is considered yours, and you violate by your rabbi yimotzi. If on the other hand, the guy says, will you allow me to just keep my chametz in your possession, somewhere within the bounds of your house and so forth, and you don't take any achrayus, that's where the word lecha excludes shalacherim, and you don't violate for the chametz shel God. Now, at this point, the Gemara invokes a sugya Masechta Bava Kama, and the case there is a case where somebody stole kachim mizbeach, and the question is whether he has to pay kefel or tashlume dal vehe. And the Gemara there introduces the sheet of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds that if there's kachim shechayev lebach rayos, for example, you took upon yourself a commitment of harei lie, and if this hegdesh is lost or stolen, you have to replace it. Then it's considered yours, and if somebody steals it, he has to pay you kefir. So the Gemara says, "Hanich, I understand the brisa and the way Rava paskind like that brisa. Leman the Omar, according to Rav Shimon, who holds Dover Agarim Lemomen Kemomen Dami, and therefore, when you accept upon yourself achrayus, such that if the guy's chametz in your possession is lost or stolen, you have to pay for that. That's called mama, and Rav Shimon considers it yours to such an extent. And in Kachim Shechayev Lachrayus, if somebody steals it, he has to pay you kefel because it's yours. But according to that mandiyama, the Chacham rejected Rav Shimon. They hold Davar Gorim L'Mammon. It's not Mammon. It's not technically yours. You didn't make a ginyan on it. True If it gets lost, you'll have to replace it, but you're replacing something that you owe to someone that's not yours, is Michael Meimar. So why then do you violate by your Rabbi Motze on Pigdono Shal Nachu when you accept Rechrayus? Shiny Hacha Diamar Lo Yimotze. This justifies the extra pasuk Lo Yimotze, where the Torah includes, even in the absence of Lecha, the chametz of a guy under the violation of the law. And this is the exception to the rule, meaning universal law, according to Chacham of Shimon, is Davar Gavil Mamin Lav Kemam already here, that the Torah has a special rebbe of Lo Yimotze to teach you that you're chayev as if it was your chametz, even though technically it's owned by a guy because you accepted a chametz. Ike Diamri, the Lishna Basra, has a different version. Ani Chalaman Diamid Davar Gavil Mamin Lav Kemam David. Hainu de Itzrich Lo Yimotze, and here we're turning to Vav Ham and Aleph. The reason why the Torah had to add this ribuy of Lo Yimotze without the Lecha is because universally Davar Agam L'Mamin Lav K'Mamin Davi. So we needed the Lo Yimotze as a ribuy to set up Chametz, and Bal Yerabbi Yimotze as the exception to the rule. Elaman di Omar, according to that man Yamuk says, K'Mamon Dami. That even universally, like Kotcher Shechai Vachrayis, Rav Shimon says it's like it's yours, and we consider it yours. Somebody's going to have to pay you kefil if he steals it. So then Lo Yimotze Lamali. Why would I have a Havamina to say that I don't violate the Isser of possessing, owning chametz in the case of Kibol of Achrayis? After all, it's yours. It's we need it. Salke Daitachamina. Hoil V'chi Isa Hadar Beinei Labrik Shusekai. We're going to apply the principle of Rabbi Shimon of Davar Goim L'Momen K'Momen Dami, but that's only when the object is lost. Somebody stole your Kodshim Shechai B'Achrayusa. But right now, in the state of chametz, as is status quo, the chametz is alive and well. It's be'en, and you'll just simply tell the guy, "Here's your chametz back." Why is that a gorim l'moment? He's called mashmalon. Now we have the pasuk of Lo Yimotze to tell you that the very fact that he deposited in your rishus, such that theoretically, if it gets lost or stolen, you'll have to pay for it. That's enough to consider it as if it's yours for the violation of Yerabbi Yimotze. Mirz Hashem, in the next year, we'll start the sugya of Boy Minei Meirava Behemas Arnona, which you will see here on the top of Daf Vav Ham and Aleph, 4 lines down from the top. Thank you, and have a great day.